Hello, everybody, and welcome to another one. This time, we are neither dealing with time in particular or fantasy in general. This time, we are dealing with something rather more to do with our own world and time. So, as you might know, there is a war on. And in relation to that, I wanted to take a bit of time and spend a little bit of energy on directing what attention I can towards that and the aspect of helping the side of the good as I see it. That side being the side of Ukraine. And so I wanted to highlight some aspect of the conflict that isn't just awful or terrible. It is at that, but also has an aspect that I find admirable, and I think is a reflection of the kind of values and the kind of righteousness that I find both positive and inspirational in the current struggle. Part of that has to do with the casualty evacuation procedures of the Ukrainian army, and the general reverence for life and for the maintenance of morale that you can see on both a daily basis and in some of the harshest situations on this battlefield. So, inspired by a series of videos posted by volunteers who do casualty rescue and casualty evacuation, and also a bunch of medical volunteers, I wanted to try and put some focus on that and create a bit of a piece that could sort of give both some of the action and the sort of impressiveness of it, and also try and give it a bit of my flair and see if that couldn't be something. So, as you could see at the beginning there, we started with doing some thumbnails, which isn't something we do very often on here, but it was a good practice to try and set up the concept quite clearly and get an idea of what we wanted to do, and then sort of working out the principal thumbnail into a rough sketch, and then taking that into some line art, and as so often is the case with with the work that I do over the streams and on the Patreon. I'm learning every time the importance of taking probably about 50% extra time on doing the line art properly. You'll probably see it, especially in the latter parts of this video, how I could have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of effort on doing a lot of the detailing earlier on. And that's a lesson that we keep coming back to here, and I think it's worth learning about a bajillion times. So we're well on our way there. But overall, this was a really good learning experience. It really highlighted something I really liked, which was working with especially modern tactical gear, and particularly in the case of Ukraine, where uniformity of battle dress isn't necessarily completely uniform. There is a lot of variety, which of course lends a little bit of interest to the piece. But also it allowed me to kind of get more into the particular designs and concepts that underline a lot of the tools and equipment that is being used. So I really appreciate that. I quite like sort of the conceptual side of that, and I quite like the aesthetics of more modern tactical gear. So it gave a little bit of a taste for it, and I think that would be something I would want to explore in the future. Probably outside of the scope of Tyne, obviously, but it'd be fun to try and do something that's ancillarily related to that kind of thing. Anyway, as you can see, the scene itself is attempting to do some pretty simple, but I think rather effective bits of composition. So we have the three-man group in the center, connected to the guy on the right via the arm and the hands interlocking, and then the slightly separated figure on the left, sort of being the standout figure. And so the three figures in the center are kind of providing a calm middle point to the composition, and then the two figures on either side are both connecting to the central figures, one via unseen eye contact and the other via, as I said, like the hand and arm connection. I wanted to use the light to kind of put the attention in the center where the interaction is between our wounded comrade and what I kind of thought to be his squad leader, or maybe company leader. And the idea here being to reflect a mentality that I've seen repeated a couple of times in several videos, that you often would expect to be a lot bleaker and a lot less humorous or heartwarming. And not to say that it's really not lacking for heartbreak, these videos. So you do see some people's last moments, and that's truly breathtakingly awful. But in the moments where they manage to show you some of the humanity in those situations, I find true and deep inspiration, especially in the moments when one might otherwise take a rather bleak look at the situation. There's something about the rather stubborn optimism and can-do spirit of the Ukrainians that I find really admirable. And so the title of the piece, being "All Shall Be Well, Slava Ukraini," is kind of a testament to that. It refers quite specifically to a video of a medical worker who's evacuating a soldier, I believe, from the Bakhmut front, and literally holding this person to life with the pressure of their hand. They're continuing the sort of mantra that all shall be well, hold on brother, all shall be well. And you might call that wishful thinking, or something of the sort, but to those who are in those trenches and to those who are facing that kind of adversity, it seems that is the attitude they choose to have towards it. And I can only say that it reflects the very best of every retelling of stories from conflicts that I think have been worth fighting through relative modern history or history in general. And this is no exception. I don't think I could hope to sum up the qualities, I think, of the Ukrainians and all the things that I find admirable in the struggle in one piece. So we might have to do more of these. And I will say to my patrons, thank you very much for your patience. None of my patrons asked for this. Not that sort of I gave them an option. I just wanted to do this. And in the spirit of being real good eggs, they paddled on with me. They allowed me to sort of settle in for this couple of month-long ride of learning a lot about the stuff that I didn't know. And as much as this has been heartbreaking, and as much as it continues to be so, it feels like it has allowed a lot of us to see, let's say, the forest for the trees for the first time in a long time, and a lot of more things kind of make sense in the wake of this. Not that justifies anything, obviously, but I feel a great amount of responsibility, to a degree, to sort of say a proper thanks to those who have chosen to stand up in this conflict and do the stuff that, for me and for a lot of other people, I think, this almost seems unbelievable to do, to put themselves in harm's way in this way. Both volunteers and those who are, either conscripted or are voluntary military. It truly, it's a deeply humbling thing to see what they do, and they are, as they say, defending all of us. At least, if you believe in a liberal world order, if you believe in the settlement post World War II, there is no real getting around that this is a a continuation of a similar struggle. And I think, sort of deep down, I don't think that is a controversial thing to say. And if one can sort of do anything, lend what small weight one has to the scales, I think it's an opportunity to do so. And so that's what this is an attempt at being, small as it might be. In terms of how just to build the piece, started off talking about the thumbnails, obviously, but you can see that it goes through a lot of stages here. There was a lot of learning. We also did a set of studies to kind of get a little more of an understanding of the, particularly with the clothing, but also the general visual aesthetics. And you can see, for example, in the helmet of the central figure, how there is a sort of push and pull element there. Those big sort of grayish bars on the side of his helmet at the moment will, in relatively short order, be first explored a little further as I'm trying to sort of push the general shape language. And then I realized that I've misunderstood the basic construction of a modern tactical helmet. And so I pull it back and sort of do it again. It is definitely, it's another sort of reminder that the further you go into studies and the further you kind of try to understand something and put it into a piece, the further down the sort of study rabbit hole you go, because you can study something till you have a basic visual understanding of it, but then as you put it in and you show your lack of actual knowledge, suddenly it reveals to itself. And so once I realized, how the mounting strips on the side of the helmets worked, and took this closer look at that, I realized, of course, that the design I'd made was ridiculous and had nothing in common with the actual thing, and so I had to go back and kind of do it again. So there's a lot of that kind of learning. I do, one of the things that I spend a lot of time on is understanding ancient and medieval means of warfare, and I do tend to apply, a similar standard of believability to all that I do, and this is no exception. And so I know more or less how a basic, combat vest with ammunition pouches and so on can be mounted, and how it sits on the body, and how a 2-point or 3-point gun harness hangs and so on. I know some of the different textures and materials that go into these things, but there is a very distinct point at which that understanding, that knowledge ends, and it's interesting to butt up against that and find like, oh yeah, no, that was about all that I knew, and then you gotta sit back, you gotta take a moment, and you gotta try it again. So in terms of a learning curve, this really presented some interesting things. And again, as you'll start seeing now, as I start sort of twiddling with the smaller details, line art and taking that to a considerably higher level than I did would have saved me a lot of time here. This is not a new lesson. It's just a relearned lesson for the umpteenth time. And I think, you keep relearning it. And sometimes you learn it in the opposite section. We've had pieces where I might have gone too far down the detail rabbit hole and had to redo them because, they worked as line but not as texture and paint. So there is continuous humbling effort here in learning this stuff. But overall, I do feel that the process went relatively smoothly. If it went long, this is by far the longest piece we've done on the stream. And so again, I want to thank everybody for being such good sports and being so patient. And with everyone who gave feedback and everyone who sort of helped me with an external eye, again, I am very grateful to all of you. So, moving into sort of the colors as we have from here, you can see how I've worked up a lot of the value structure and then started applying colors through a color layer, and then I've started painting on top of that, first with a soft light layer, I believe, and then with a normal layer. And that's not a half bad way of doing it, especially when we had a color setup that was going to be as differentiated as the one we had here. The outside was always going to be like a little more blue and kind of try and offset with the yellow and blue flag and so on. and then the inside was gonna be perforce warmer, so it would have the infrared sort of alarm lights going on, and I figured that would be kind of good. I know I believe that there are now other lights that are used for the interest of like not alarming the patients and so on, but I think I've seen a lot of videos of this kind of stuff, and red light is sort of something that's recurring as a motif, so I thought it would be both useful and it would lend a sense of drama and a sense of something slightly unexpected that also gives you a good sense of inside versus outside. And so overall, as I work back and forth to try and push and pull between light and figures and textures and so on, that red light is a wonderful anchoring device because it allowed me to sort of put it in wherever I need to round off a shape or whatever the main light sources, secondary light sources couldn't really penetrate. Another thing that was very interesting as far as a learning curve thing went was smaller details. And again, here the whole line art issue would have been good to have settled beforehand. Both in terms of the folding of some of the clothes and some of the gesturing things looked fairly good in the line art, and then needed to be fixed multiple times over once I had kind of figured it out. I think maybe most of all, it's a lot of the tactical stuff. As I mentioned earlier, I do try, and you can still see it on the helmet on the guy in the middle. I still, I tried to do some designs that I thought were sort of in keeping with the source material that I had studied. And this is an example of how my usual study cycle didn't necessarily serve me perfectly well. I had sort of pushed my study to a point where I thought, okay, I have a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like. Not quite sure, how this thing works. It has kind of a Picatinny rail system sitting on the side of the head form, but I don't only know that now. So having done one set of studies of that helmet, I thought, whatever. I kind of figured these shapes. That's fine. And then, I hadn't. So it became one of those things that actually took up quite a lot more just time in terms of correcting the mistakes that I made. Where I think it would have been far more effective if I had been a little more circumspect with my my work to begin with. But then again, I'm getting the feeling that is going to be a lesson I'm going to have to keep relearning quite a few times before I ever get to one of these videos and feel like, yeah, we freaking nailed it, boys. But all in all, I felt because it was a personal project too, I had the freedom to kind of play with this. I didn't really have any style to match. Like in the Time universe, I kind of feel like everything has to be able to sit in the same world. Here, I more wanted it to be something that's recognizable as something representing things in our world, but doesn't have to match it exactly one to one. So, there's definitely a bunch of like me in there, in terms of workup and whatever, but it's far from perfect, and there's a lot of stuff that I learned for the next time I do something like this, which, depending on how things go and depending on the response to this piece and all that, maybe we'll do more of these, because it was a good experience, and I do feel that if one can, as I mentioned earlier, do something to direct people to take an interest and to try and support as well as they can the cause of what I think is the good cause in this, then one should. And so, I'll harp on this later too, but I would like to suggest for anybody who has half an interest to go to, for example, United 24 or any of the other donation sites for the Ukrainian cause, and give if you have something. If you have anything left over from personal means or whatever, then please consider giving, because it is very much a worthy cause, and it is one that still needs, in spite of all the support. It is a country that has been sorely tested and could need all the support that can possibly be given. So as you can see here, I'm struggling more with this arm, and I'm having a pretty good time of it. I see now. There's one thing I kind of wish I had stuck with. Is more of that red light, letting that flow down on the lower arm. I wanted to let that stick more up in the up towards the face there, and not let it flow too far. So I think actually I pull it further back. But there is something very effective and graphic in like having it spill down on that arm, and I think in hindsight that did look pretty good. So I'll try and remember that for the next time I do something like this, to rely more on kind of the graphical read, because that's another thing to learn. I don't do by far enough of these kinds of larger illustration works, and I think it was extremely cathartic and it felt very good to try and push my illustration work and my composition work more. I had a good time just trying to like figure out and think out how to move the eye around the piece and how to match, the reds and the blues and the greens and so on. And also, you'll see in a bit, we're going to be doing, we're going to be breaking up a lot of these like green surfaces, these green flats, and with camouflage patterns. And of course, again, here's a general advantage of painting for something like this current setting, which is that the Ukrainian quote unquote uniform is not all that uniform. So I had the freedom of sort of playing around with different camouflage patterns and stuff, which in another setting or with another army might have been a more difficult thing to keep sort of varied and interesting and so on. The maybe the largest challenge of this whole piece was painting the face of the guy who has been wounded, the guy lying down. The extreme foreshortening was no small challenge, and especially with sort of foreshortening of weird angles of heads. It's not necessarily my strong point, and the angle of the light and the guy sort of looming over him, all of that presented pretty serious challenges to my skills. And I don't think it came out like perfectly in any way, but I do think it came out fairly good. And I quite like the sort of end result, especially in terms of the expression and the exchange between the two of them. The thumbs up, pretty international signal of it's gonna be good, it's gonna be all right. And I felt, that is a good summation of the Ukrainian, if not motto, then general esprit de corps. There is a sort of truculence to their optimism. This unwillingness to let the direness of the situation get them down, as it were. They do seem to defy dourness in a way that I find refreshing, and that reminds me, to speak to a larger sort of contingent, the Blitz, for example, and the British sort of spirit there, or in the case of my own country, what we call Gutta på skaven, or the Boys in the Forest, which was sort of the Norwegian resistance groups, who they met with a lot of a lot of bad results for their efforts, but nevertheless there was this idea of if not us, who? If not now, when? And it has to be done, so let us do it. And a general optimism that just would not be subdued. And seeing that in real life, something that I have only really heard of in stories and in war tales. Again, I find it pretty fresh, honestly. So as you can see, we dropped in some of the camouflage, and at this point, I'm quite starting to get quite happy with the whole piece. I mean, there's definitely more polishing to be done, but especially the guy on the right, I do feel like the arm is kind of reading by itself now. It's not your eye is not being sort of pushed into the center. It's kind of being lured there by sort of the complexity of the pattern and everything. So overall, very happy with how that went. The faces too were an interesting challenge because not wanting to sort of go too much into studying particular faces or making it too close to life. I didn't want to make it portraits of anybody, so I had to come up with the faces myself. and sort of creating variety that didn't get into the sort of comical or caricaturish. Um, Felt like a challenge. I think I maybe made more of a challenge than it needed to be, but trying to sort of give enough care to these faces and make them feel both careworn, but also have that slightly sort of unabashed energy to them that I see a lot of in the combat footage and stuff. Um, that felt like a good challenge. You'll have to be the deciding vote on whether or not it was a success, but it felt like something worth exploring and worth pushing. And I definitely feel like I managed to overcome some tendencies in my own habits, which was very gratifying. The same thing with the modeling of the headgear, especially, but like of most of the elements around. The thumbs up hand, for example, uh, took some doing, but I feel like the final modeling on that too turned out pretty good. All in all, the thing I might be most happy with here is the lighting. I'm quite happy with how once you've sort of let your eye roam around the piece a bit, it tends to settle towards the middle between the two thumbs up finger, the hands, and the prone figure, and then you can kind of let it flow around the piece a little bit. And I try to not let the face on the far right there be too much of a draw. So you can see, like, I'm trying to make sure that the modeling is correct and that it's good and solid, but I don't want too much contrast there. So that'll be darkened down quite severely before the end, so that the eye can kind of move more easily back to the center. So a lot of those considerations I'm not very used to making, because usually at this point, especially in the process, my mind is a lot more fastidious about how detail affects the overall read of a character, for example. So forcing my head into like a different mind space and solving very different problems than the ones I'm used to was quite fun. It presented a very different kind of challenge and a very different kind of concentration. I think I've learned a lot from that. I think, especially in terms of like rendering and deciding where to put attention and so on. Yeah, it felt very good. It felt very solid. Also, in terms of using very layered corrective measures, like you can see now, for example, I made a correction layer where I changed the exposure a bit and sort of like putting that back and forth, just brushing it in and brushing it out with a mask layer is also something I don't do a lot of usually, but that also felt like a pretty good way of creating a consistent read all over the piece. And little by little, we're putting in more and more details. I'm putting in like an IV line there that he's pinching against the wall of the vehicle they're in. On the right, there comes up a blood bag. Having looked more at references in hindsight, I should probably put more blood bags, but maybe they're at the last of the run or whatever. And there's definitely like more stuff you learn as you go through a piece like this. So like by the end of it, as with so many art pieces, all you can really see is the stuff you didn't manage to put in, which is why I also feel like I would probably like to do more of these kinds of things and highlight more and other parts of the conflict and the efforts on the Ukrainian side that I find deeply admirable. There are, for example, the logistic runs to the Azovstal defenders, for example, a heliborne incursion that I think is it's a story for the goddamn ages. There are a lot of the other efforts, especially in the south and in the east, that are very much worth hearing. There's the defense of Mykolaiv. There's a lot of stuff. So I'm going to consider whether or not to to do more. But again, it depends on time and space and whether or not people like this stuff at all. If people would, well, it mostly depends on me, I guess. But we will see. Most of all, I hope the people who this is meant for will end up finding some amount of enjoyment out of it and feel like they've been seen to a certain degree. And overall, I want to thank everybody who sat through this, who hung out with me and gave me encouragement when I was flagging a bit, and managed to push through and kind of made this as good as I could. I learned a lot. I hope to learn more. I hope you will want to learn with me. And until next time, I guess all there is left to say is Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. Everything will be okay. Ukraine will be victorious. See you in the next one.